Hi, it's Michael, and welcome to my first podcast of 2023. Last couple of podcasts, I talked a lot about setting goals, so you should go back and check out those podcasts, part 1 and part 2, about activating your hunger, staying hungry, and SMART goals. I think that's really going to help you. But today is really, I'm going to keep it short and sweet. You know, I notice a lot of athletes I work with, I've noticed this with myself as well, that it's really easy to get psyched up and set goals for the future, but there's a lot of things that can kind of knock you off that path. You can lose your motivation. You can maybe be tempted to readjust your goals. So today I wanted to talk about something just super simple that will keep you on the path to crushing your goals, and that is perspective. One word, perspective. That's it. I was thinking about this the other day, and it made me think about how, you know, we got it pretty good here. If you're listening to this podcast and you're living in the United States, you got it pretty good. And it made me think about some athletes that I've known here and there over the years who didn't really have it that good growing up and yet made it into the big leagues, made it into the big time. And a couple months back, I was talking to some Cuban cyclists here in the Naples, Florida area who raced back in the 1980s. That was when I raced, so I could really relate to them. And we were talking about old bicycle parts and things like that. And they told me what racing was like in Cuba in the 1980s and the kind of equipment that they had to race and train on. And the stories, I mean, you can't even make this stuff up. The kind of hardship that they went through, the kind of poverty that they endured from living in that environment. And, you know, without that perspective, it's really, you don't have that kind of a baseline of how good things are. And that if you're trying to achieve some athletic goals and you grew up in the United States in relatively, let's say, not, you know, totally poverty-stricken conditions, your baseline is different from folks who grew up poor, who had that more broader perspective of what to be thankful for. And I think a lot of times we can lose motivation as athletes because we lack this sense of perspective and gratitude. Really, the word that comes to mind is perspective. And I want to give you a couple of examples here of athletes who grew up in poverty, extreme poverty. Recently, we lost the great soccer player Pele, and I was reading up on him and his life, and, you know, just an incredible champion. And when he was growing up, his first soccer ball, apparently, this is the story, was a sock, like a really elastic sock that was filled with rags. And he would kick that around. And I mean, just imagine that, like, if that was your sort of your baseline reality as a child, that you were playing soccer with that and you were enjoying it and having fun with a sock filled with rags. Another great athlete that comes to mind is the tennis player Novak Djokovic, who was born in 1987 in the former Yugoslavia and really grew up not just in poverty, but in extreme war-torn conditions where there's bombs going off and family members dying. And like, it's, you know, the war that happened during that time that hit Belgrade and that whole area there is pretty unspeakable stuff. So, you know, if you think about just the word perspective, if you're feeling down about things, if you're not reaching your goals or just feeling that kind of dullness, and this is what happens in January with a lot of people, is they set these initial goals for the year. And by the end of January, early February, the initial momentum and motivation kind of wanes, and they can get tripped up by, frankly, comforts and excuses. There isn't that deep perspective of how bad things could be, and they don't really appreciate really what they have right now. And of course, it's all relative, right? But add a greater spectrum to your relative reality, and that can help. So, I mean, I'll just give you my own kind of personal experience on this. You know, when I was started bike racing, that's the sport that I'm really into. I started when I was really young, probably age 12. And when I was 16, I talked about this on another podcast as well, but when I was 16, I really wanted to make it big. Like that was when I decided I wanted to be like a pro bike racer. So I gathered up just enough money and borrowed some money and went out to this big race in Colorado, and it was very poorly planned, and I actually ended up running out of money. And so there was a day where I had zero money and no place to stay, and I basically just finished a race and was stuck in the middle of Colorado. And so the last money that I had, I actually spent on a cheesecake, like a frozen cheesecake in like a convenience store, and kind of just sweet talked a friend of a friend to crash in his hotel room. And the next day, I woke up and ate the rest of the cheesecake, and I was hungry. I was very, very hungry, physically, mentally, spiritually, everything. And I had to make money that next day for gas money to keep going. And, maybe I could have wired home for money. And this is back in the days when you had to like wire money between banks. That might have been possible. I probably wouldn't have died. But the point is, I was at a place of kind of an interesting perspective. I had never been in that position before of not having any money really in my pocket at all. And it just changed the way I operated. I wasn't complaining. I wasn't, worried about my career, my results, what kind of bike parts I had, maybe I was missing a meal. Like I just didn't care. Like I had to survive. And so that next day, the race, I won, I think it was 2 or 3 of the preems. These are the intermediate races within a race, and was able to make enough money to pay back my friend and get on the road and keep traveling. But that's kind of like the lowest point, honestly, that I've ever been, like financially and in my cycling career. And, shortly after that, I got soft again, honestly. I made some more money in races. Parents gave me some money, etc. So that was really, the hardest it's ever been for me. And it just got me thinking, like, one of the quickest ways out of low motivation as an athlete is just freaking think about some perspective. Like, who would kill to be in your shoes right now? Think about that. Like someone in sub-Saharan Africa or Sri Lanka who works for, like pennies a day and is barely feeding themselves and has like no money for athletic equipment. Would they be cool like being in your shoes right now? And you're sitting there complaining about, oh, I wasn't able to have whatever, like I'm on a diet for my sport and I can't eat desserts and oh, it's so hard. And, I had to get up at 5 a.m. and ride, and no one else is doing that. And oh, it's so hard. I don't know how much longer I can handle this. Life is so hard. And, and I'm adding this kind of mocking tone to this because, I've done that too. I've complained, and you really need to get some perspective. Like, you're doing pretty good. When was the last time you went hungry? When was the last time you didn't have a roof over your head? Have you been through a war in your country? No, probably not. Maybe you have, I don't know. But point is here, like, if you find yourself complaining and having low motivation and, just look around you and be grateful for what you have right now and realize, again, like, there's a lot of people that would kill to be in your position right now. So leverage the hell out of what you have right now and be grateful for that, and stop complaining and build on what you have, because you have this incredible foundation, because you're living in the United States, probably, if you're listening to this podcast. So you're way ahead of the game, man, like way ahead of the game. So like you have this incredible solid foundation, leverage the hell out of it and keep building and stop complaining. So as I'm lecturing here, I'm kind of lecturing to myself as well. A lot of these podcasts are, frankly, to motivate myself, to remind myself of how I stay motivated. And I'll share two things I think that you can do as a regular practice to keep you motivated and not fall into the sort of complacency of affluence of living in the United States. And one of them is gratitude, writing down gratitude. For the past, I think about 4 years now, every single morning, pretty much without fail, I've written down 3 things that I'm grateful for every single morning. And some mornings I'm rushed and I write it down anyway. And I have these little notebooks and I write down 3 things I'm grateful for every single morning. It's the way I start the day before I do anything. Sometimes I'll have some coffee going, but like before I check social media or anything, I write down 3 things I'm grateful for. And it gives me that perspective. If I'm feeling a little down on myself or I think life is too hard, I'll just write down, that I have a cup of coffee that I'm able to drink. I'll write down that I have a roof over my head. I'll write down that, some great people in my life are still alive and not, killed in a war. And as simple as this is, just looking at the words staring back at me from that piece of paper, it really does make me feel grateful. And I take a minute to actually appreciate that, like truly appreciate it and not just fake it. And it really changes the tone of the day. Like, wow, I get to wake up again today, and there's people who don't. And there's people who live in certain countries who will never, ever experience the kind of affluence and comforts and opportunities that I have. And I owe it to myself to really not waste that and really jump on these opportunities. So that's how I start my day every day. Another thing I do is I call it kill the complainer, or I also call it abstain from complaining. And this is whenever I catch myself complaining in my own mind, or God forbid, I catch myself complaining to other people about something, the whiner, I nip that stuff in the bud really quickly. So I would suggest you do that too. If you hear the character inside of you, I call it the complainer, who makes excuses, who said, this morning I had to go outside and train, and it was 30 degrees, and it was so cold, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, you know what? Again, that's the complainer. There's people around the world who would kill to be in your shoes right now, so stop complaining. That's really it today, folks. Is I just had this realization the other day of like, get some freaking perspective and be grateful. That's almost like the cure-all for a lot of things. A good dosage of perspective and gratitude and stop complaining, that will often get you out of that tempting rut of low motivation, because you know what? There's a lot to be grateful for. So that's really it today, is the idea of perspective. Like, get some perspective. And I think that will help you. You have so much to be grateful for. You have so many freaking opportunities. It's insane. Like, look around and leverage the hell out of that stuff and stay hungry. Get out there, crush your goals, think about how good you have it, and think about some imaginary person who would kill to be in your shoes right now and how they would jump on the opportunities that you have. That is my sports psychology podcast. This is Michael Seeley. If you're interested in coaching with me, you can go to michaelseeley.com and check out my coaching programs. I'd love to help you. Everyone, please be well and get out there and train.